We will continue with the Christmas story. Today's story is called My Family. I had spent my 16th summer working at a dude ranch and returned home with $200, more money than I had ever had before. I entertained so many different ways to spend it that by the Christmas season I still had it all. I was old enough to understand the worried glances my parents exchanged at comments my brothers and sisters made regarding their Christmas wishes. Dad had recently recovered from a serious illness, and medical costs had made a sizable dent in my parents' Christmas budget. I approached Mom with a suggestion that she and Dad use my money, but she wouldn't hear of it. She explained that they had decided to forego giving anything to each other and would just make sure Santa made his visit. It wasn't too many days later that I heard my parents discussing an offer made to Dad. He had been snowmobiling again with his friend Bob. It wasn't hard to see how much Dad and my brothers enjoyed this winter sport. They returned from their snowmobiling ventures full of enthusiastic stories. Now Bob had offered to sell the snowmobile to Dad for a reasonable price. Without realizing, I had crept closer to their room where I could hear every word. Mom said, "I know $200 is a good price. You think we could do it?" After a long pause, I heard a deep sigh that said so very, very much, followed by Dad's voice. "No, I just don't think so." Another long pause then. "There'll be other times." I stole away to my room while my thoughts ran like wildfire. $200. That was every cent I owned. It would close my account entirely. I got ready for bed, and after turning out the light, I could picture my family riding that snowmobile. All night we chased snowflakes in my dreams. With the light of the foggy winter dawn, I felt calm. I found a few moments to myself to call Bob. "Bob, this is Louise, Ellis's daughter." "Yeah, he's had a lot of fun on that machine." "Listen, I understand that you offered to sell it to him for $200. Is that correct?" "Well, I heard them talking about it last night and they decided they couldn't buy it. So what I'm wondering is, if they decide they can't buy it for sure, could I buy it from you for that price?" "I could." Thanks so much. Yes, it would be a surprise, so don't let on, okay? Thanks." I hung up the phone and tried not to think about it for the rest of the day. It was not a spontaneous act of selflessness. I had to wean myself from my money, avoiding thoughts of how long it had taken to earn it and all the other ways I planned to spend it. The days crawled by. Christmas Eve finally came. After midnight, Bob's sons would sneak over with the snowmobile and park it on the lawn where we would be sure to see it. Anticipation made sleep difficult. Christmas morning brought shouts as the younger ones raced downstairs to see if Santa had come. The drapes were drawn in the living room. I sneaked a peek and caught my breath. There it was. A huge red bow adorned it, and Bob's sons had shined it till it sparkled. I can't remember what I received that year. Mom gave me a quizzical look once. I guess my excitement for what I knew was about to happen overrode what my enthusiasm should have been. I kept waiting for someone to open the drapes. Finally, my brother David glanced outside to check the weather. I'll always cherish the look on his face. He's the family's mechanic. And to him, that machine represented tinkering at its best. David approached Dad and asked in a low voice, "What's that outside on the lawn?" Dad's questioning look was authentic, so David knew Dad didn't know either. They walked to the window and Dad looked out. I almost laughed aloud at their sharp, surprised looks at one another. In unison, they looked at Mom, who was still helping the youngest ones open and assemble toys. Dad bent down and gave her a big kiss. He started to thank her and asked how she managed it. Her look of surprise was also authentic. Now all three went to the window. I ducked my head. One look at my foolish grin would give it away. After a few moments of murmured exclamations, Dad and David threw on coats and went outside to investigate. David revved the machine and spun it around the yard. He was in his glory. They searched it for a card. The noise of the snowmobile drew the rest of the family to the window, and I oh-oh'd and ah-ha'd with them. I could see Mom studying me carefully, and I knew the game was over. It was at that moment, on that frosty Christmas morning when I'd had helped fill a Christmas, Wish that I knew the real meaning of the old cliche about it being better to give than to receive. God will bless you. We will continue with the Christmas story. Today's story is called Quiet Streets. She was seated alone in an upper room to which John, her son's beloved disciple, had brought her. She was too tired to cry. She was too numb and cold. It was all over. The path her son had walked, the rugged road that he had traveled, had come to an end on a stormy hilltop. Sitting quietly, Mary thought back across the years, more than 30 of them, since she had clasped a newborn baby to her heart. She had been so proud of her son, all through the 30-odd years. When stories came back to her of his miracles, she had been so proud and so bewildered. He had raised the dead, he had walked on the sea, and he had fed a vast multitude. She had half expected, as she knelt on Calvary, that another miracle would come to pass. But no miracle had happened. Yes, it was all over. Mary rose from her chair and walked wearily across the room and stood looking out of the window. From somewhere, not far distant, there came a cry. It was a thin, fretful cry, the cry of a baby. She walked back to her chair and seated herself. The cry was insistent. It echoed up and down the street that had been quiet only a few moments before. Every now and then the cry ended in a choking gasp. Maybe another tragedy had happened. Maybe another soul, a wee one this time, was passing. She was almost relieved when she heard once more the sound of pain. She thought perhaps the mother is very young. Perhaps she does not know how to care for it. As if drawn by some invisible chain, she crossed the room and opened the door and descended the steps that led to the street. The sound of the baby's cry drew her down the street. There were people standing in doorways whispering together. Their whispering ceased as Mary went by, for most of them knew who she was. She walked without fear. What was there to be afraid of now? She walked up to the door of the shabby house and pushed it open. A girl with a sullen, haggard face was seated by a cradle, rocking it mechanically, and a baby, lying in that cradle, was wailing with a choking little gasp at the end of each wail. The girl looked up at Mary's approach and started to ask, "What do you want?" Mary answered, "Your baby's in pain." "He's always in pain. Ever since the day of his birth, he has cried and cried." "What is wrong with your child?" "It's his back." "No, don't lift him. He cries harder when he's lifted. I know how to handle babies." She reached into the cradle and slipped her hands under the little body and raised the baby gently in her arms. Her fingers, braced under the baby's body, felt the bump between his tiny shoulders. The poor little thing. To be born a cripple, to start out with a handicap. My child were better dead. To be born a cripple, his father wanted a strong, straight son who would grow up to be a soldier who would follow in his footsteps. Day after day, night after night, I rock my baby's cradle. He never ceases crying. Where is the baby's father? He's on duty, you see. He's one of the palace guard, and there's been a crucifixion on the hill beyond the city. He may not be home until the night is over. Mary, her fingers under the baby's back, suddenly remembered the soldiers who had knelt in the shadow of the cross and had drawn lots for her son's garment. She thought, I'm glad the baby's a cripple. I'm glad he will never grow up to be a soldier. She said aloud, put him back in his cradle and take him away from my arms. I can no longer. She stopped, for all at once she realized that the baby's crying had died away and that the tiny century-old face was touched with peace. Why he stopped crying? The girl came close to Mary and looked down with amazement at her child. She said, if he would be like this for an hour or two, I could get some sleep. Lie down and rest. He won't cry again. Mary, with the baby tight against her lonely heart, walked to the doorway and stared out into the darkness of the alley. The baby was not asleep. His eyes were fixed on Mary's face, and it was to him that Mary spoke. If my son were alive, your future would be secure. You would be straight and strong. When my son was alive, he did miracles, and cripples were made whole. The baby wriggled one hand free from his swaddling clothes. His fingers, like white threads, flickered across Mary's downbent face. It was such a helpless hand. In the years to come, it would be outstretched, asking alms of the busy people who thronged by, for cripples in this city were invariable beggars. Mary, with bright tears in her eyes, was thinking of the vast number of cripples who would go through life, bent and twisted and hopeless because her son was dead. She was pitying all the people whose brains and souls were crippled because her son was dead. She was speaking to the whole silent city, to the whole silent world, not to a baby. It's not for myself that I grieve. I had my Savior more than 30 years and may dwell with my memories. But those who will be born this year and next year, for thousands of years to come, will have no memories to guide them, for he is dead. There will be no more miracles, for he is... Her voice trembled as she looked at the small face. It was round and pink, the face of a normal baby. And under her fingers, the curled hump that had tortured the baby was melting away, and she could feel the wee shoulders growing straight.